Ωραία. Μπορούμε να καλέσουμε στο βήμα τον καθηγητή João Seco. We can ask Professor Seco if you can come to the podium. He will drive us through the in-flash radiotherapy, I think. Yes. He's professor and head division in biomedical physics department at the KFZ, and we are anxious to hear your speech.
Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you first of all for the invitation. I hope some of you have heard of FLASH. Please raise your hand to say first if you're awake, because I know it's hard in the afternoon, there's no coughing. Okay, that's a good start. Do you know FLASH or a little bit of FLASH? Please raise your hand. Okay, so most of the people in the front are awake, but I cannot see down at the back. Is everyone up there awake? Can you hear me? All right, great. So I will try my best to keep you awake for the next 30 minutes. And I would like to thank all the organizers. And I thought I would make a little joke before we started. Oh, first, my conflict. I'm sponsored. I have industry funding through Precision to build a new system for them. I thought I would like to remind you, does anyone remember of something that happened 20 years ago? Since we had 20 years later, anyone remember? Raise your hand if you got an idea what I'm talking about. No, I see no one is remembering, but 20 years ago, you guys won the European Championship. I know it's really important. I'm a football fan myself, so I wanted to remind you of that. So here we are celebrating physics, or medical physics and football. So we can really, really take advantage of it being a really nice job. We can really study football. Okay. Now, if I ask the same thing about 10 years ago, does anyone awake still after those 20 minutes, 20 seconds of football? Well, this one is a bit more specific to FLASH, in fact. FLASH was really discovered 10 years ago through the group in Paris, okay? It was really, as usual, in physics, an accidental discovery. They went looking for one thing and they found something else, okay? But I'm going to take you through the whole thing in a minute, okay? So FLASH on the left is the movie. That's not what we do. Radiotherapy is what we do on the right, but FLASH radiotherapy is the same thing, just very, very fast. And I'm going to show you how that works, okay? All right, so there is a really nice quote from Professor Anthony Zeitman, that was my boss when I was working in Boston. He was also the president of Astro for many years. And he used to say, we have the physics where all we do is give the radiation very, very fast, right? 500 times faster. Suddenly, we have this no toxicity effect, right? Why is that the case? The level of protection, okay, the level of toxicity is significant. It can be sometimes up to 60% of protection, right? And it happens primarily to the healthy tissue. It doesn't happen to the cancer, okay? Okay. So we don't know the mechanism at the moment. So there are hundreds of papers. Looks like every day a new paper comes out with a new idea. Most of them have been shown to be wrong, okay? And it looks like the human imagination is so big that every 2 or 3 weeks I get a new paper to review on a new idea, okay? But I want just to emphasize, we don't know what's going on. It is unique that the only thing we do is accelerate the radiation given, not anything else. We just give it 500 to 1,000 times faster. That's it, okay? So just a quick thing, right? What do we know? We know that it's related to oxygen. The effect somehow blocks oxygen damage, all right? So for many years, this was the key idea. So that you understand what that is, I'm going to just review what is oxygen damage. So on the horizontal axis, you see oxygen in pressure of oxygen in millimeters of mercury, and you can see basically, somewhere it should come. Okay, you can see there's the 10 millimeters, the 20 millimeters. 10 millimeters is roughly 1% of an atmosphere, 20 millimeters is 2%, and so on. And on the vertical axis, you have effect. Okay, the effect of the radiation, how much it sensitizes damage, all right? Usually we use the control of 1 at hypoxic conditions. When there's no oxygen, you kill 1 cell, okay? As you eventually increase oxygen, you will kill up to 3 cells. So it's a 300% increase. It's a lot. The bad news is the cancer has usually very low levels of oxygen. They are in the few millimeters of mercury, 5, 6, 7 millimeters of mercury. So usually around 1% or below. That means I only have a gain of 2, right? From 1 to 2. The healthy tissue are always in the very, very high levels of 30 to 40 millimeters of mercury. So just for the same level of oxygen, right, we lose, right? The healthy cells get more damage relative to the cancer cells. This does not include DNA repair, okay, but it's primarily the oxygen effect. So you see that if we could control oxygen damage, we could do this. This is called the FLASH effect. We take the healthy cells at high oxygen and we block the effect. Okay? This doesn't mean I'm taking out oxygen. I just change the effect of oxygen. Right? There is a very big difference here, and I'm going to explain that a little later. We block oxygen damage. That's what FLASH is doing, and the reduction in cell kill goes from 3 to 1. That's a huge decrease in cell kill. Okay, so just a small diagram so you don't forget. Who likes to go to the beach? Hopefully most of the Greeks that I know like the beach. All right, imagine that you had a job. Okay, we don't, but imagine that you had a job where you spent most of the time on the beach, like 360 days in 1 year, so a huge amount of time. Imagine giving that radiation in 1 day, right? That's FLASH. FLASH is giving 360 times faster to 500 times the radiation in that period of time of 1 or 2 milliseconds, okay? And what you do is you block oxygen down. If you want to remember the talk, this is it. This is the slide. Probably you will remember the red part, not the white part, but fine. You block oxygen damage, okay? This was observed already in the 60s. In the 60s and the 70s, they'd already observed this. And at the time, it was not called FLASH. It didn't have a fancy name. It was just called ultra-high dose rate, okay? So short UHDR. So there was a study in 1967 in Nature where they show the oxygen effect. And here, this is a survival curve. This is a survival curve. And on the horizontal axis, you have survival. At 0 gray, you have 100%, so you have no cell kill at 0 gray. And if you have hypoxic cells, you usually have, on the horizontal axis you have dose, but in the 60s they used to refer to as RAD. So 1,000 RAD is 10 gray, okay? 10 gray, 20 gray, 30 gray, 40 gray. And usually what you do to generate hypoxic cells, you flush them with nitrogen gas. So this is fully hypoxic. This is the cell survival curve as a function of dose. Then as you increase oxygen with air, so air is this linear curve, you have your standard cell kill, which is much higher, right? And suddenly you see an inflection point here, which should not be there, and this is related to the high dose rate. So you see that the high dose rate has a completely different shape, and it's almost parallel to the nitrogen, okay? Because it's parallel, it's telling you that somehow it's blocking oxygen damage, okay? And so you have here a very unique situation that this inflection point occurs at roughly 8 to 10 gray. There's an initial threshold dose, and you need a very high dose rate to achieve this. It was done at around 100 gray per minute. Okay, so there is an inflection point right over there in the middle, and that inflection point is the key to where the high dose rate effect kicks in, right? And it's the curve beyond the inflection point is parallel to the hypoxic conditions. And that tells you that it's related to oxygen. So somehow we wipe out oxygen damage, and we have a need of very high dose rates and a threshold dose. This threshold dose can be between 6, 7, 8 gray or 12 gray, okay? This threshold dose was observed in the first study already in 67. It was then observed in the second study in 1969. And the dose rates are, again, very high, right? The dose rates are 7 nanosecond pulses. That's roughly 100 million gray per second. It's much, much faster than a radiotherapy department, okay? It's a huge dose rate. And you see the black curve. Now it's very clean. You see the black curve? It appears at roughly 6 gray, 5, 6 gray. So this study led to many studies in the 60s. In vitro, this was in vitro, on hamster and human. So HeLa is human, and also in vivo. Most of the studies in vivo were done usually for skin cancer and intestine, okay? And then they forgot about it because they couldn't really find a benefit, right? So they forgot about it. They thought radiation would block damage in both healthy and cancer at the same time, so there was no advantage. And this was a mistake because they had the wrong theory. They assumed everything didn't work. And the theory I'm going to explain now what it is, all right? Okay, so 2014, the group from Vincent Fauvédon in Paris were, in fact, irradiating mice to study toxicity in the lung. They wouldn't even care about anything else. They would just started irradiating mice in 2010, 11 with toxicity in the lung, and they found none, which was really curious. How can I irradiate mice and have no toxicity? And then, then they went back and they found that they were giving around 10,000 gray per second, so much lower than the millions, but also a very high dose rate relative to the clinic. And the key difference was that at that time, they identified something unique. So what was the main advantage? Thanks, I'll take it. So they compared electrons at very high dose rates. The Orion machine that they had allowed around 10,000 gray per second to the X-ray machine, which is the cobalt, giving roughly 2 gray per minute. That's your standard clinical setup. And they found a huge level of difference in toxicity, right? So here, on the axis, in the vertical axis, you have pulmonary fibrosis, which is a side effect of radiation of the lung. And on the horizontal axis, you have dose, 10, 20, 30 gray, okay? And what you see immediately that the standard conventional treatment, the red curve, very rapidly hits very high levels of toxicity. You reach 50% of toxicity with 5 or 6 gray, right? But you won't even get close with the other one, right? So the blue line doesn't even reach 10% of toxicity, even at 40 gray. So this is a huge difference that I identified, and I really were able to bring the dose rates down to 60 gray per second and show that this effect appeared at 60 gray per second. Now, 60 gray and 100 million gray per second are 6 orders of magnitude at least. And they were not expecting this, okay? This was an accidental, is that my pointer now? Oh, yes, thank you so much, you got it working. All right, so this big difference in toxicity was really something unique. Because the dose rate is nothing like 1 million gray per second or more, it was a very low dose rate, they were not expecting this. And so they took them a year to find out where it was coming from, right? They did even H&E and S plots. This is a pathology image. And you see very clearly here your control. You see your control here. And you see that the curve looks really good from a control perspective, right? And here, very dark purples indicate very high level of apoptosis. Cells are dying, radiation, conventional. But if you compare the flash looks more like control. So this was a clear pathology analysis that there is something happening at high dose rates that we don't understand. And of course, at 30 gray, you start to have something similar to the control. So this was the normal tissue study they did, okay? What they were worried was, if I give the same dose, will I achieve equal tumor control, okay? And this is why it became called FLASH, because they studied tumor control also with the same dose, the same found that I get protection for the healthy tissue, but I maintain tumor control. So this differential effect is what is today called the FLASH, right? Same tumor control as conventional, lower toxicity, right? The two things together are FLASH, okay? In the 1960s, 1970s, they never did the two things together because they never thought it was important. In Paris, they were very careful to do organ toxicity in one study, tumor control in another, and to show that there was a differential just because of dose rate. This is really the key for FLASH. And you can even see that at the levels of around 25 gray, I have even complete tumor control, right? So this is really good because if I went back, I saw no toxicity at 25 gray. So this was the major discovery. Now, FLASH has been checked and validated in so many different locations of the mouse that I've identified them here from a review paper. It's been identified in brain, in lung, in mouse gut, in hematopoiesis, in mouse skin. In addition to that, it's been validated in a variety of animal models, from the dog to the cat, to the mini pig, and to the zebrafish. So it is clearly there, right? We don't understand why, and it changes from animal to animal, but it's there. And the follow-up study to the auction study, to the 60 studies, was this auction study from Pierre in 2019, where they studied brain irradiation with more oxygen or not, right? So in your blood is usually fully saturated with oxygen. So in order to increase the level of oxygen that you get to the organs, you have to give something to the blood to transport oxygen, right? You cannot just breathe more oxygen. This doesn't really work. So one way to do it is to do what Lance Armstrong used to do in the Tour de France, is to take something called EPO, right? But EPO also affects the cancer. So another way to do it in mice is to use carbogen. So if you use carbogen, you can increase the blood content of oxygen by 50%. So it's a huge increase. And you can study the impact of this additional oxygen in the blood. So what he did is exactly that. The two lines, the black and the gray, represent no irradiation, okay? And the two dotted lines here, dashed lines, they represent conventional radiation. And you see clearly that there's a very big difference between control and 10 gray. And the mice were studied for novel object recognition. So when you irradiate the brain, you lose the ability to see new objects, to identify them quickly. And with this study, they could really study the ability to identify new objects. But if I flash, you see a huge sparing of the brain. The brain is still functioning completely normal. But if I have more oxygen, 50% more oxygen, I lose 50% of the function. So this was a huge increase. It basically shows that I have more oxygen, I lose flash. Flash controls oxygen. This was a very important study that it showed in vivo for the first time that we control damage with oxygen. So this was, just as an important, this was all long-term effects. So it's not like immediate 5 minutes after radiation. You wait some time, 3 or 4 months, and then you do a neurocognitive assay. Okay, the flash effect. Let's just get to that to see how many papers were published over a period of a few years. So my colleague in Trento, Emanuele, he published a small report saying there were like 30 papers just in 3 years alone. So you see he had so many papers that are published on possible mechanisms. Emanuele divided it into 4 main boxes: oxygen depletion, radical recombination, intertrack effects, immune system. These are all things that can happen when you deliver the radiation very fast. You produce a lot of things at the same time, okay? The one that was dominant from the 60s was this oxygen depletion. It was so important that 90% of the papers had this idea. Now, it's relatively simple to think about it if you think, right? If oxygen does damage, right? If I deliver the radiation so fast that I remove all the oxygen, there's no damage, right? It's straightforward. So that's the idea behind the oxygen depletion. The radiation is so fast that it removes the oxygen before it can do damage. And this was the theory in the 60s, the 70s, and most of the papers that came out up until our paper in 21. Here is the concept, okay? Radiation on water breaks it up into all these little components. The most important one is this OH radical. That's the one that is really literally toxic to the DNA. It goes and steals the hydrogen from the DNA. This is called hydrogen abstraction because it goes after the hydrogen. It needs it to be stable. And where are the hydrogens in the DNA? On the sugar molecule. So the sugar molecule and the base have a lot of hydrogen. And so this has a high affinity for those hydrogen, and if it steals one of the hydrogens, it becomes unstable, the DNA. It can be repaired in that position, but it's still unstable. Now, the oxygen fixation is what makes it unrepairable. So oxygen comes in, and you can just see about here, oxygen comes in and literally reacts with the DNA and produces a form of change in the molecule type, right? So if you think about it, you have a sugar, you add OOH to it, you make it an alcohol. That's a simple change that can happen, but now it's unrepairable, right? DNA has sugar molecules that are important for the structure. If I come in and I change the molecule structure, it immediately opens. And there's the damage. Okay? So this is called the oxygen fixation, and this was at the heart of the oxygen depletions. If I have no oxygen, I have no damage. Okay, so how does it work for depletion? If I have oxygen, if flash comes in and removes the oxygen with all the radicals that it produces, I have no damage. This is the oxygen depletion equation, hypothesis. I assume that flash is so fast that it doesn't give time for the oxygen to come back. It's removed all of it, and there's no time for that fixation part, the first step. And this was true for around 50 years. My team in Heidelberg and the group in Dresden, we decided to go and test this, and we started to measure directly oxygen. Okay? It's not measuring the effect of oxygen, we wanted to measure exactly only the molecule O2. So we had to design a new sensor to put in a non-invasive system. So here you have a little sensor, black. This is a completely insulated probe. It's the size of a coin, and you have to read through a laser to make sure you don't go inside. And what we observed was literally the opposite that was being said. So in our paper in 21, we show that, in fact, here on the horizontal axis is dose rate. So the conventional radiation is up here. You'll see it coming up now. Roughly 0.1 gray per second is conventional. Flash is up here. Right? So you see that at very low dose rates, I remove more oxygen than at high dose rates. Literally the opposite, right? So if I'm assuming that oxygen is going to be all removed very quickly, this should be the opposite, right? And what we observed is exactly what was showing that the depletion hypothesis is not true. At the same time, so I was really worried. We were the only team to observe this, and we were really worried that something was wrong. At the same time, there was another team in the US that had seen exactly the same thing. So it was almost really luck. Within 2 months, we published at the same time, and we basically turned the field upside down. So here again, the team in University of Dartmouth, run by Brian Pogue, they did exactly the same thing, not in water, in BSA, so this is bovine serum. And you see here, conventional, you remove 3.8 millimeters of mercury, flash, you remove 3.1. Again, less oxygen, not more oxygen is removed. Right? They did the study not only in medium, they also did in a mouse. They have a oops, sorry, my apologies. They have also a special probe, which is different from ours, that can be injected directly into the mouse, and they saw this also in vivo. Okay? So then, and further studies that we did 1 year later, we wanted to see how important the initial oxygen is, right? So we know that we're removing less oxygen, but is this value also controlled by the initial oxygen present? So if we have an initial oxygen that is low or high, does that control the flash effect? And yes, in fact, it does. So again, the conventional is the blue, yeah, and the flash is the red. And you see that already there's a reduction in consumption. But at the same time, as you reduce the oxygen, you see that it goes down to 0. Eventually, there's no flash effect, close to 0. So the flash effect is literally starts to separate it somewhere around here. So this was also showing that initial conditions play a very big role. This is a complicated situation because when we treat patients, we never know what is the initial condition. So we need to figure that out. Okay, can we achieve the flash effect without the dose rate? So my lab has been working on this for 3 years, and we wanted to show, can we achieve chemically the effect without the high dose rate? So this is what we wanted to do, right? This is your survival curves that you've seen just a few minutes ago. They have this really nice parabolic shape here, and this is dose on the horizontal axis and survival. So here is 100% because there's no radiation at 0. And here on the top line you have head and neck cancer cells, and on the lower line you have healthy tissues. So HACAT is a form of healthy cells. SAS is a very resistant cancer cell for head and neck, both head and neck. And we achieved the same flash effect chemically. So what we did is we went in chemically finding out where the mechanism is, blocking oxygen damage, and we saw a significant increase in survival. And at the time, we didn't even need high dose rate anymore. So imagine that I could control the oxygen damage chemically. I can give a patient a drug just before therapy, wipe out the organ toxicity, and allow me to go after the tumor. So this was possible for the cancer cell and the healthy tissue, and the significant gain that we observed dependent on the cell type. So there is some gain in healthy tissue, and there's also some gain in cancer cells. So the key point is that for now, we have a patent on this concept. We describe chemically how to block oxygen damage. We don't need the high dose rate. We are now testing this in animals in 3 labs with us. Hopefully soon we can develop a method of using this compound for patients. Okay, I wanted to also ask you a question. Most of you work in the clinic, I think. This is what I understood, right? So how can we translate flash into the clinic? I get a lot of these questions. It's a very complicated high-dose system. It's very difficult to control with high dose rates. How would I translate the flash to the clinic? So what is needed for flash? We need a high dose rate. This is well known. We need high dose, but we also need few fractions. And if you think carefully about this, you might have heard of some of this already, right? If you look at point 2 and point 3, does this sound similar to some treatment that is already used in the clinic? Anyone want to raise a hand and say? So this is kind of, yes, stereotactic body radiation. So we could use the same model. We could use this model to build flash. So if we use 2 and 3, we can go back to the clinic and say, look, we have SBRT, we already learned how to do this. We just need the high dose rate. Well, it's not so easy like that, but the high dose rate is a key parameter, okay? So, in fact, just for those who don't know what SBRT is, it's very, very high doses per fraction of roughly 10 to 18 gray, in fact, sometimes more. Probably you don't know, but the University of Dartmouth has already treated single fraction of 32 gray. So you can go up to 30 gray single fraction. So that's perfect for flash. It has a unique biological advantage. No one really understands why, but it works really well, better than conventional. It can be easily used with protons. So flash at the moment is ideally suited for electrons and protons. So this one can be used easily for protons. And it's most commonly, the problem now is tumor size. You will not use SBRT for big tumors because of the volume. You have a volume effect, that's a problem. So you have to look for small type tumors, all right? And of course, there's a lot of know-how everywhere. So we know what it is. We know we have some experience with this, 5 or 10 years. And in Boston, I set up the SBRT method with my colleague Greg, and we went through all the history at the time to identify all the various dose rates. And so here you have 12 times 4, 15 times 3, 20 to 22 times 3. You have a very high level of dose per fraction, which is ideally suited for flash. I even did a treatment in 2011 when we set up the first protocol in Boston, comparing photons with protons, SBRT treatments, and you see that it's relatively easy with protons, 2 beams, which is ideally suited also for flash. Okay, how do we deliver now? We have one limiting problem now, size. We cannot deliver a big volume with flash because we've learned from SBRT this is not a good thing. So let's try to pick, let's just jump that so we can get to the end. Let's try to pick small volumes, okay? What if we break up our volume, the treatment volume, into 2 sections? One small section, which is flash, and one slightly bigger section, which is non-flash. And the flash is the one that I shoot through an organ. So I have a protective organ that I have to protect. I shoot through and I irradiate only partially the tumor with flash. Then I can use this concept of small volumes. I don't have to irradiate the whole tumor with flash. I just need to irradiate the region that is close to the organ. And then I can fill the rest with IMRT, with IMPT, with VMAT, whatever I want to use. Okay? So we have an interface problem that we have to match very carefully, and the whole system has to be robust to many things. Okay? But we can deliver the flash through the red and the standard IMRT or IMPT through the blue. Adding them together, we have a full treatment that we can do. So under these conditions, you get something like this. One treatment, one beam. The beam comes in. And you can even have a full coverage like that. All right? So just to finish, here's an example of a treatment that we designed in Heidelberg. You see now the flash beam coming in, and you see the coverage is very good, and the critical organ here is the spinal cord. And you see full coverage without any problem. You do have a hot beam, but that's flash. You're always going to get a slightly hot beam, and you just have to be sure that you protect the organs you want. This is one example of a 330-degree angle. You could also have, and here's the comparison with conventional. And if you look carefully, it's cold. The conventional, best conventional plan, this was in fact the plan that was treated, the one on the left, you see it's cold here near the spinal cord. Ours is not cold. Okay? You could also change the angle. Maybe you have one day 360 degrees, the next day you could have 160. So this gives you a lot of flexibility. Okay, so just to finish, oxygen depletion, as I've shown, which was the dominant theory for over 40 years, we showed simultaneously with the group from Brian Pogue that it's not true. We don't know yet how flash works. We have chemically achieved it in the lab, but we're still trying to prove that in the animal. Clinical translation, I think, should follow something called the SBRT model because it's much, much easier. We have a lot of experience with SBRT. Let's use it in flash. I want to acknowledge all my funding agencies, and I especially want to acknowledge my team that did most of the work. I'm just the boss. I get them to do the work. That's the whole point. Most of the people on the left here, Jeanette, Daniel, my biologist, Francesca, and my other biologist, Luca, they were the people that were in the lab running everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Seco. Any questions from the audience? I have a small question. I noticed that you add an IMRT plan in the example that you gave us, an IMRT plan with the proton flash beam. This is a physical summation. You don't know the radiobiology behind the 2 different qualities. So how you can model that?
So the RBE is one issue. That's true, right? So at this point, when we did this summation, we did RBE summed plans. We didn't do physical plan. But ideally, you would do an RBE summed plan, and you would also have to take into account the biology at the edge. So the LET and the fall-off of the proton plan could have an effect.
So the distribution that you showed us is just a physical sparing of the spinal cord, not a biological sparing, actually.
No, that was RBE corrected plan.
RBE corrected
plan, yes, okay. That was an RBE corrected plan, yes.
Thank you. Dr. Báltas, Professor Báltas.
You showed us the dose distribution for the proton beam.
It is true that at the prescription dose you have the flash dose rate, but what about at 50%, 20% isodose? Then you don't have flash. Could it be that you have the inverse effect there? That the single shot is much more biologically effective for normal tissue than your normal?
So that's an excellent question. So I think the key point is I didn't tell you exactly the dose rate. But we are aiming to go at least 300-400 gray per second. That means 50% or even 20% is above that flash. So the key point is dose and dose rate. If we at 4 or 500 gray per second, even 10% is at 40 gray per second. That would be the idea. But we need machines that can do 500 gray per second. Most of them are not that far. Most of them can do 150, even the protons, 200 gray per second. So we need a technological jump to reach that. But it is a very good question. At the edge, you have a tricky part. That is very good, yes.
So any other questions from the audience? Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Seco, for your excellent speech.
Καλησπέρα. Ευχαριστώ πολύ για την πρόσκληση. Χαρά μου που είμαι εδώ. Για κάποιους που ήταν στο μεσημεριανό συμπόσιο της Ελέκτα, ίσως να δείτε κάποια slides ξανά, αλλά τα περισσότερα θα είναι διαφορετικά από τα προηγούμενα. I think I should change into English so you can understand most of it, because my English is not that great anyway. So we have the privilege of having a Unity, an MRI-guided system at the Mary Perkins Cancer Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And we're going to go through the conflicts of interest for my talk. And we're going to do a trip through the memory lane since March of 2023 to today, on how we started and how our program was developed over the last 18 months. And the first question I was asked was, why MRI-guided radiation therapy? The obvious reason was the better imaging, or the differences in imaging, the ability to see targets and normal tissue that you cannot see with conventional cone beam CT as we know it today. CT SIM, you can see some of the structures. Cone beam CT becomes a lot more difficult, but soft tissue imaging with MRI is unparalleled. The limitations also that we had to face over the last, or we are facing even today, is with patient anatomy that's changing on a daily basis, with respiratory motion that is always there, with the differences, especially in prostate cases that we treat about 50% on our Unity now, in bladder filling and rectal filling, bowel changes, and also tumor sizes. Adaptive radiation therapy, as you probably know, is taking into account all these anatomical changes, can take into account all these anatomical changes. And as we moved from 2D to adaptive radiation therapy, you can see that even the even changes in the tumor size and tumor location can play a role, and we have seen that in our clinic. This is one of the slides. To appreciate some of the advantages that we have with MRI-guided therapy is, in this case, the case of the bladder of the patient that has a difference in filling from simulation all the way to almost every single treatment that we have treated. Oops, wrong. Adaptive radiation therapy using the MRI approach would empower us to adapt the change, adapt everything, and even allow us to see the target while we're treating and adapt to it, if possible, or stop the beam, hopefully in the near future. And the advantage of having a 1.5 Tesla magnet gives us the ability to adapt biology when this is available. To appreciate some of that, some initial changes in the anatomy of the patient, you can see the original contours on the MRI, how they were presented on the CBCT, and what happens, how we change them on a daily basis. Another example on SBRT liver cases, as we go through the ability to clearly see some of the targets and make a plan that will adapt to the changes, will adapt to the target on a daily basis. This approach allows us to escalate doses or that's our goal in the near future. We already have some cases that we were able to do so, and treat more patients with where the soft tissue is a lot more clear and easier to treat. The limitations of the adaptive radiation therapy that we have to take into account is the time for treatment. Although there are some centers that I have learned today that were able to shrink the time for treatment down to less than half an hour. We have not had this privilege yet at the Mary B. Perkins Cancer Center. Our fastest prostate treatment was at 27 minutes, and usually our time slots for a single treatment is about 45 minutes. And this accounts for the ability or the option that we have to change contours, to adapt contours, to create a new plan from scratch with the patient on the table. So at Mary B. Perkins, this process started probably in about almost more than 2 years ago, in the middle of 2022. The room was identified, or actually the need was identified, and they decided to go with the MRI Unity, with the MRI Linac from Elekta, the Unity. The reason being that there is a long collaboration between the Cancer Center and Elekta. They decided the Unity, as most of you know, the Unity has a 1.5T magnet. It has about 50 cm field of view. It has a 7 MV flattening filter-free Linac and 57 centimeters field of treatment. So we first identify the room. You can see a floor plan of our, the small one is a floor plan of our radiation therapy and at our main location. And here is on the big red is the decision where to put the Unity. Several attempts were made to see how we would best fit the Linac into the room, and the one that was decided was this one, where actually I have a better picture, where the control room is down here, the technical room is adjacent to it, and the mechanical room is adjacent to the Linac. The MR part and the Linac came through this little wall. This wall did not exist for about 1.5 years, and everything came through. As soon as the location and the size and the orientation of the Linac was decided, the next step was to work on shielding and the room construction. So this is how the room or how the area looks today. This is a parking lot, or actually there is nothing there. It used to be a parking lot. The control area, the technical room, this is the hallway leading to our MRI SIM, and we have some storage and patient change rooms on the other side. So the shielding was evaluated, the shielding was designed, and it was submitted to the Louisiana state to get approval. And after approval, we got everything we needed to start construction. For those who do not know about Louisiana, Louisiana is or Baton Rouge more specifically. Baton Rouge is very close to the delta of Mississippi, so if you dig down about maybe 30, 40 cm, you'll find water. And that's a problem when you have to, when you have very heavy equipment like the Unity or the Gamma Knife. So to accommodate this particular need of our room, on the very left, you see those pylons, pillars, whatever you want to call them. Those spirals go about 40 to 50 feet down until they find solid ground. These were driven by this little guy, this little piece of equipment that it was mostly, everything was mostly run by electricity to avoid fumes, to avoid noise, and most of the work was also done during the night because the whole department was working. So it was a lengthy process because we were not able to utilize the full day for construction. After all these pillars were inserted, and there were about, I think, 60 of those going in, we were able to pour concrete. The room looked like in the middle, and this on the last picture is the outside of our LINAC room, where the control and the technical room are. Although this door was did not come until later on, this is a direct shielded LINAC room and a 30,000-pound door, probably close to, was that 14 tons? March 23, the whole LINAC arrived, and it took them close to about 14 hours to move it from the truck into the room, actually all of it. And the first part that comes in, when you get your Unity, is the ring. The whole LINAC runs on a ring. And then the next piece that comes in is the MR. Lastly, they start putting all the pieces together, and this is the swinging arm that comes down, and so the engineers can work on the actual LINAC head, the MLCs, and everything else they have. And finally, our room, after close to about 6 months of construction, looks like this. Now, during these 6 months, we took the time to address some of the issues to start our program. So the first one was an MRI safety. For that, apart from the fact that we have an MRI diagnostic imaging physicist, Dr. Kirby, she started training of all the personnel that would be involved, plus more, so we can avoid accidents like the ones in the picture. We have a large area that we do not allow patients to come in anymore. We had to consider about oxygen in the room, so our oxygen tanks are anchored to the walls right now. What immobilization devices we will also use, and if they are MRI safe. Implant devices, wheelchairs and stretchers, all that had to be MRI compatible or MRI safe. And training was ongoing, is ongoing, and every time that we have new staff, new students, they have to go through similar training. At the same time that all this was happening, a team of 4, 2 physicists and 2 therapists, started going to sites that have already implemented such programs, like the University of Iowa, Medical College of Wisconsin within the United States, and I think they also visited Stony Brook. It's very important when you start something that big and that complex, and the stress is building on a daily basis, to observe others, how they go about it, to learn from them, ask questions. There is a lot of things that you cannot think of when you're about to start. And at the same time, develop policies and procedures for not only for the ones that have gone to those training sites, but also for the ones that are coming. Technologists, physicists, physicians come and go, so you have to have a reference at least whenever they come on board to have a starting point. Training, as I said, involved therapists, involved physicists, involved nurses. You see that it doesn't involve dosimetrists yet. In the United States, dosimetrists are the ones responsible for the plan creation. For the Unity to date, 4 physicists are the ones that create all the plans. Then we had to get training for the equipment, for the Unity, for the MR, for the fandoms that we will be using daily, for daily QA, for daily imaging, for patient-specific QA, and the software that goes with them. Treatment planning, we had to learn Monaco, the 4 of us. We had to learn Aqua to do the daily QA and monthly QAs. And we had to learn something about MRI to troubleshoot whenever we have some issue. The next and most important thing was to try to figure out how many people we need for the program. We anticipated in the beginning to work about 10 to 12 hours on a daily basis, and that the number of patients would be close to 10 to 12, assuming about 45 to 1 hour time slots. For that, we would like to have 4 therapists. We now have 3. We have 4 physicists, including myself, which I'm not considered full-time because of all my other administrative duties. But we also have 1 diagnostic MRI physicist, 1 dedicated nurse to the Unity to prep patients, and 5 physicians are already referring to our Unity for treatments. Then August came, September. Elekta came and started measuring the Unity, all the parameters for our beam. One of the things that you don't think is the cryostat, and it had to be characterized, and that's a very lengthy process that I don't like to go through it again, so I'm hoping that Elekta will do it for us again. And all the other normal beam parameters that you would measure for any other LINAC, from outputs, PDDs, profiles, and so on and so forth. And all the data then is taken to Elekta, and they will do the beam model for Unity. They will send it back to the Monaco, and then we have to verify. And the lines that you see showing the difference between the measured and the beam models. After all this process has gone through, the next step that we have to do was to start preparing for patients, for real patients. Before that, we thought that it would be important to do our own end-to-end testing, and we did that with the RT-Safe Prime Fandom, and our results are shown on the slide. We were happy with whatever we got, and December 11th, as I said before, was the first patient that was treated on the Unity at the Mary B. Perkins Cancer Center in Baton Rouge. So, what patients? And how do you start? So, for all our patients to date, we are doing a CT simulation followed the very right after by an MRI simulation. So we have the privilege of having an MRI simulator at Mary B. Perkins. So all the patients are going through both scans. We have decided that all our patients will be treated with arms down or with arms across their chest. And that is because for patient comfort. When you have a patient on the table for 45 minutes or an hour sometimes, it is very hard for them to keep their arms above their head. In that case, we will try to avoid the arms on our planning. The other constraint is patient size. They don't all fit, especially in Louisiana or in Texas. The third problem or issue that you have to take into consideration is the tumor size. You cannot treat very long tumors. 18 cm is the maximum opening that you can have. So usually something between the 16 to 17 cm on long is the maximum that we will treat, just because when you have to make shifts, you have to take into account that as well. And we have decided today to treat without immobilization devices. So the patients go on the table. The only thing that we put in is the wing board at the back, just to index the table, and a knee step under the patient's knees. We have seen just going from CT to MR, which are about maybe, I don't know, not even 20 meters away, changes in the patient anatomy. And we are trying to take into consideration when we are do the contouring and when we try to identify, when the physicians identify the targets. We are hoping, though, that at least for prostates, who are 50% of our cases to date, that we're going to go forward with MRI-only radiation therapy and avoid the CT simulation. For that, we are evaluating, and we're about to release the Therapanisia synthetic CT. It's the only one synthetic CT from MRI that is available in the United States. We have done extensive testing, and we had some presentations in the past at national and international conferences, and we feel confident that we will not lose anything that we will be gaining from the CT sim. We will only gain one more time slot for simulations for our CT and patient comfort. Okay. These are some of the examples that we have seen between synthetic CTs and real CTs. And these are some for you that are more comfortable with Monaco, some of the scorecards that show basically no difference. Even the highlighted one was just highlighted one. There is no real difference between the doses that we get and the doses that we get for the same monitor units when we're using synthetic CTs. Speaking of treatment planning, speaking of, let me go a little faster now. Speaking of treatment planning, we have to use Monaco. We're using 5.51. Unity treats only with IMRT, step and shoot. Our templates approximately used 11 to 15 beams, preferably 110 segments in total, so we can put it all in one AFS and go a little faster. And you have to plan a little different than you plan for anything else, because you have to take into account later on that you're going to go through ATS, adapt to shape or adapt to position. We have also some patient-specific QA. We're using the ArcCheck. Again, I think it's the only one that is available for us in the US, and daily QAs. So in the first 3 months, we have been treating probably about 3 to 4 patients a day. We took our time to learn how to plan with Monaco more efficiently, more robustly, and how to create more planning and sequencing mostly. In the next 6 months, our patient load has jumped. Now, although we were anticipating 10 to 12, we're at the point that we're treating 14 patients a day, and we are ramping down to 8 because it takes too much time today. Lastly, our next goal is to go through our Mosaic upgrade 3.22, so we can utilize comprehensive motion management where we can take advantage of gating and beam monitoring along with the MRI monitoring for comprehensive motion management, as you see in the video that I got, I think, from Utrecht. One thing to consider with Unity is that it needs more PMs, more preventive maintenance than a regular LINAC, about 1 day every 3 months. And you also have to take into account that the machine at some point is going to break. Over almost 1 year of treatments, a little less, we have 2 days down with audiovisual, about half a day with a hard drive problem, and 1.5 days because our magnetor was arcing. Just for the interest of time, I'm going to almost play as a movie the next few slides just to see the differences between reference and actual daily planning, daily imaging for prostate cases. As I said, we have about 3 to 4 prostate cases a day. That's about close to 50% of our patient load. But we also have treated a whole bunch of livers, adrenals, and you can appreciate the differences in the duodenum and stomachs in those, iliac nodes, kidneys, and on top of those, spines, some lungs, a cardiac sarcoma, and as I was leaving Baton Rouge, we were treating an axilla. All this, thanks to all these people at Mary Perkins and LSU, Dan Eck, Jen Voss, Chris Snyder, and Crystal Kirby are the physicists that are working for the Unity. Morgan, Christina, and Trevante are working as our TTs, as technologists. And the rest are the physicians that are sending us an impressive amount of cases on a daily basis. That's my last one.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, κύριε Σταθάκη, για αυτή την ξενάγηση στο τι μπορούμε να πάθουμε αν πάρουμε ένα Unity. Υπάρχει κάποια ερώτηση?
I have a question on the schedule, on the time. Since the treatment time is around 45 minutes or 30 or 45 minutes, at which time point you actually take into account the deformation, the different shape of the organ at risk or the tumor? So, for example, for a prostate, let's say that when you image, you see that you have a rectum that is filled. Then you take account of that. But when you finish treatment, or in the half of the treatment, it's a different geometry. You can see it with the MR, but what you adapt again, what you are doing.
There have been many times that we have adapted again and again. So the patient is on the table. Especially for prostate, the imaging sequence takes about 2 minutes. Then it will take about usually 5 to 10 minutes for all the registrations and some of the contouring. We do not contour everything. We only contour within 2 cm, inferior, posterior, and lateral of the target. And at the same time, you can take as many images as you want. So we keep taking images to see if the patient is changing. If we see that the patient is changing, we will restart that process again. Knock on wood. This doesn't happen very often, but does happen. The other scenario that can happen is the opposite, that you have a bladder that is filled and the patient cannot hold it anymore and let it go, and then the bladder is collapsed. Most of our criteria, most of our objectives are volume-based, not relative absolute volume-based. So even if that bladder collapses, when you say, for example, you have the 3 cc max, the 3 cc is always the 3 cc there. It doesn't matter if the bladder is 10 cc or 100 cc anymore. But it does happen quite a bit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Νομίζω ότι θα έχουμε όλοι πολλές απορίες και θα βρείτε τον κύριο Σταθάκη και στο διάλειμμα να τον ρωτήσετε ό,τι θέλετε για το συγκεκριμένο. Να καλέσω στο βήμα τον καθηγητή τον Δήμο Μπαλτά από το Freiburg, ο οποίος θα μας ενημερώσει και θα μας εκπαιδεύσει λιγάκι στην ακτινοθεραπεία καθοδηγούμενη βασισμένη σε απεικόνιση εικόνου BioMedical.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Καλησπέρα σε όλους. Πράσινο κουμπί. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Προτού μπούμε στο περιεχόμενο της ομιλίας μου, θα ήθελα να δείξω πάλι μια διαφάνεια που έδειξε ο Σωτήρης προηγούμενα, αλλά θα ήθελα να την κοιτάξουμε λίγο πιο προσεκτικά. Και αυτή η διαφάνεια περιγράφει το ταξίδι των τελευταίων 30 χρονών στην ακτινοθεραπεία, που ξεκινήσαμε από targeting position to target shape και ίσως θα λέγαμε τώρα target biology. Λοιπόν, Σωτήρη έδειξε στη διαφάνεια αυτή από μια πάρα πολύ ωραία publication του 2024, αν θυμάμαι καλά, που οι συνάδελφοι από την Αμερική περιέγραψαν όλο αυτό το ταξίδι μέσα από τεχνολογικές εξελίξεις και θα ήθελα να δούμε αυτές τις στήλες. Αναλύω λίγο τις γραμμές. Η πάνω γραμμή περιγράφει την κατάσταση της ανατομίας ενός ασθενής και σε όλες αυτές τις συζητήσεις παίρνουμε ένα παράδειγμα που συνήθως αντιπροσωπεύει τον προστάτη για πολλούς και διαφόρους λόγους. Η ανατομία είναι αυτή που βλέπουμε τη στιγμή που κάναμε CT simulation. Η κάτω είναι μια υποθετική κατάσταση τη στιγμή που έχουμε τον ασθενή στο τραπέζι. Και υπάρχει όχι μόνο μετατόπιση, υπάρχει και παραμόρφωση. Λοιπόν, αυτό που κάναμε 1980 ήταν make the fields big to hit everything and probably the target too. So my slides are on English, but I keep on Greek, yes? So, then ήρθαμε στην εποχή του 3D. Μπορούσαμε να αναπαραγάγουμε την ανατομία τριδιάστατα με αποτέλεσμα να μπορούμε να φτιάχνουμε τη μορφή των ισοδοσιακών λίγο ή πολύ παρόμοια με την ανατομία, αλλά στην περίπτωση που η ανατομία δεν είχε απλή μετατόπιση, αλλά είχε παραμόρφωση, είχαμε το ίδιο αποτέλεσμα. Είχαμε περιοχές του στόχου που δεν πετυχαίναμε και περιοχές της δόσης που πήγαιναν σε λάθος μέρος, εκεί που δεν θέλαμε. Στην εποχή του IMRT και IGRT καταφέραμε να μικρύνουμε τη διαφορά μεταξύ δόσης και στόχου στο επίπεδο του σχεδιασμού. Είναι αυτό πάνω. Αλλά όσον αφορά την πραγματοποίηση της ακτινοθεραπείας για ένα τέτοιο σενάριο, είχαμε το ίδιο αποτέλεσμα. Ίσως και πιο μεγαλύτερες περιοχές του στόχου που να μην πετυχαίναμε και ίσως μικρότερες περιοχές της υγιής ανατομίας που πετυχαίναμε. Η μόνη περίπτωση να λάβουμε υπόψη μας μια τέτοια διαφοροποίηση είναι αν έχουμε τη δυνατότητα στο setup του ασθενή στον επιταχυντή μας να αναμορφώσουμε το σχεδιασμό μας με τη συγκεκριμένη ανατομία. Αυτό είναι αυτό που λέμε adaptive. Εάν έλεγε κάποιος να γράψουμε έναν αλγόριθμο, ένα workflow της adaptive, θα είναι αυτό. Δεν υπάρχει copyrights σε αυτό το σχήμα, γιατί όλοι θα κάνουμε τις ίδιες σκέψεις. Ξεκινάμε λοιπόν με τον ασθενή στο τραπέζι, έχουμε τη δυνατότητα να κάνουμε τριδιάστατη αναπαραγωγή της ανατομίας, έχουμε μία segmentation και εδώ έχουμε δύο διαφορετικά pathways. Το ένα είναι να δούμε τι θα γινόταν αν πατούσαμε το κουμπί delivery και το άλλο ήταν ποιο θα ήταν το πλάνο της ημέρας που θα λάμβανε υπόψη του αυτές τις διαφοροποιήσεις και θα ήταν πολύ πιθανώς διαφορετικό από το αρχικό. Κάνουμε μία σύγκριση ή όχι, αποφασίζουμε ποιο πλάνο θα ήταν κατάλληλο με κάποια decision levels που έχουμε και στο τέλος έχουμε τη δυνατότητα να κάνουμε μία accumulation τρισδιάστατη της δόσης στην ανατομία του ασθενή. Αυτό είναι το γενικό διάγραμμα ποια είναι η πορεία μιας adaptive ακτινοθεραπείας. Ανάλογα με το τι τεχνολογία έχουμε σε αυτό το level, σε αυτό το επίπεδο, μιλάμε ή για X-art ή για M-art. E-Mart μας μίλησε ο συνάδελφος προηγούμενα, ο Σωτήρης, εντατικά. Δεν θα πω πόσους χρόνους χρειαζόμαστε, αλλά αν κοιτάξουμε ανατομικές περιοχές που είναι το focus των ομάδων που ασχολούνται στις δύο αυτές κατηγορίες, τότε αντικειμενικά θα πούμε ότι pelvic, head and neck, breast, lung είναι κομμάτια που έχουμε πάρα πολύ έντονες ακτίβιτες στο X-art. Abdominal pelvic είναι οι κύριες ακτίβιτες που έχουμε στο MR. Και αυτό έχει κάποιες εξηγήσεις. Θα τις δούμε αργότερα. Δεν είναι μόνο αυτή η διαφοροποίηση της τεχνολογίας, τι έχουμε για να δούμε. Έχει επίσης, διαφοροποιείται η στρατηγική, εάν το κάνουμε σε watchful waiting επίπεδο, παρακολουθούμε τις αλλοιώσεις μέχρι να έχουμε ένα επίπεδο διαφοροποίησης που σημαίνει action, αυτό είναι το offline adaptive, ή αυτό που λέμε σε καθημερινή βάση γίνεται η απόφαση αν θα έχουμε adaptation ή όχι. Και εδώ πρέπει να πούμε ότι το X-art έχει μεγαλύτερη flexibility στη διαδικασία επιλογής off-axis και offline και online adaptivity από ότι έχει ένα MR βασισμένη τεχνολογία. Εάν δούμε λοιπόν τις τεχνολογίες βασισμένες στο CBCT, πρακτικά υπάρχει μόνο ένα commercial available system, είναι το ethos της Varian, που έχει κάνει πραγματικότητα αυτό το σενάριο. Εάν κοιτάξουμε το CBCT σαν τεχνολογία απεικόνησης, θα μπορούσαμε να έχουμε δύο λίστες, η μία πλεονεκτήματα και η άλλη μειονεκτήματα. Τα έχω βάλει έτσι που να μπορούμε να συμφωνήσουμε όσο το δυνατόν πιο πολύ από εμάς. Πλεονεκτήματα συνήθως αναφέρονται ότι το CBCT πρέπει να είναι τότε πρακτικό όταν είναι γρήγορο και αν βασιστούμε σε αυτά που ακούμε για το Hypersite, είναι πολύ γρήγορο. Πρέπει να έχουμε κατάλληλη εικόνα για να κάνουμε σχεδιασμό δόσης, πρέπει να έχουμε γρήγορη contouring και πρέπει να είμαστε, εάν πάμε στα X-ray και δεχτούμε κάποια μειονεκτήματα, θα πρέπει να έχουμε μεγαλύτερη εύκολη πρόσβαση στη τεχνολογία, είτε είναι χωρικά, είτε είναι φυσικά, είτε είναι οικονομικά, θα το δούμε και αυτό αργότερα, από ό,τι στο μαγνήτη. Αυτά που συζητιώνται σαν βασικά μειονεκτήματα είναι το soft tissue contrast, αυτό το έχουμε πάντα στο θέμα μας όταν μιλάμε για X-ray ή MR, και τι συμβαίνει με intrafractional motion. Και αυτό θα πάρει λίγο πιο μεγάλη κουβέντα για να καταλάβουμε τι εννοούμε όταν λέμε intrafraction motion και για να βάλουμε τα πράγματα στη θέση τους σε αυτή την κουβέντα. Είμαστε η μόνη κλινική στη Γερμανία που έχουμε αυτή τη στιγμή δύο αίθος σε κλινική λειτουργία. Το τελευταίο ήρθε τον Ιούνιο του 2024. Δεν ήξερα αν θα είχε τέτοια παρουσίαση, μερικές εικόνες. Πάντοτε έρχεται το αίθος ή ο Linac flying που λέμε, σαν drone, στο τμήμα, συνήθως στα τμήματα που έχουν πρόσβαση από έξω ή από πάνω. Προσγειώθηκε, ο πρώτος έλεγχος, εισάγεται σε ένα χώρο Linac, προηγούμενα ήταν Synergy, τοποθέτησή του, και έτοιμος για κλινική λειτουργία. Λοιπόν, το όλο μας πήρε 3 μήνες. Σε 4 μήνες ακτινοβολήσαμε τον πρώτο ασθενή. Ακτινοβολούμε αυτή τη στιγμή ανά έθος γύρω στους 50 ασθενείς ανά ημέρα σε 8 ώρες. Έχουμε 10% adaptive cases per LINAC, για να πάρουμε έτσι λίγο μια εικόνα για τι workload έχουμε στο τμήμα. Ας κοιτάξουμε τώρα τα πλεονεκτήματα και αν δούμε ποια από αυτά είναι πραγματικότητα ή όχι. Θα απαντήσω αυτές τις ερωτήσεις ποιοτικά και ποσοτικά. Δεν θα κουράσω όμως πολύ στα ποσοτικά, όποιος θέλει να τα δει πιο καλά, ή email ή αναφορά σε publications. Λοιπόν, πολύ γρήγορη απεικόνιση εικόνας. Λοιπόν, αυτός είναι η καρδιά του HyperSight, είναι εντελώς καινούργια τεχνολογία detector. Δεν θα μπω στο επίπεδο ότι έχει πάνω από 20 frames per second, αλλά δίνω μερικά μακροσκοπικά χαρακτηριστικά, όπως ότι είναι 43x86, άρα μπορούμε να έχουμε full field reconstruction. Περιστρέφεται με 6 στροφές το λεπτό. Έχουμε full reconstruction, full acquisition σε 6 δευτερόλεπτα, όχι reconstruction. Πρέπει να το ξεχωρίσουμε αυτό. Το reconstruction time εξαρτάται από ποιο αλγόριθμο εφαρμόζεται στο τμήμα. Έχουμε μισή περιστροφή, όχι ακριβώς μισή, το ξέρουμε στο CBCT πρέπει να έχουμε overlap στο τέλος, επομένως έχουμε 211 μοίρες acquisition. Η κλασική, η standard reconstruction diameter 54, extended 70, άρα και ασθενείς για breast cancer σε αυτή την position έχουμε full outline to the body reconstructed για να έχουμε υπολογισμό της δόσης. Standard μήκος 24 εκατοστά, 38, περίπου 40 δηλαδή, αρκετό για να κάνουμε επαναυπολογισμό της δόσης σε όλα όσα μπορούμε να ακτινοβολήσουμε στο έθος με ένα opening MLC των 28 εκατοστών. Η καλύτερη ποιότητα εικόνας που έχουμε αυτή available στην αγορά όσον αφορά μηχανήματα CBCT στην ακτινοθεραπεία. Είναι έτσι. Λοιπόν, το πρώτο έθος μας μπήκε σε λειτουργία τον Ιούνιο του 2023, ήταν χωρίς HyperSight, τον Δεκέμβριο του 2023 κάναμε upgrade. Έτσι είχαμε ασθενείς που την Παρασκευή είχαν πάρει IGRT με το κλασικό CBCT και τη Δευτέρα μετά από 10 μέρες πήρανε HyperSight imaging. Μερικούς από αυτούς τους ασθενείς θα τους δείξω εδώ, χωρίς να κάνω ποσοτική ανάλυση, θα τη δούμε μετά αργότερα. Λοιπόν, ο ασθενής αυτός ήταν Παρασκευή, με το παλιό, με το κλασικό CBCT, ο ίδιος ασθενής, η ίδια θέση, co-registration με το HyperSight. Ο ίδιος ασθενής σε άδη περιοχή, τα ξέρουμε αυτά τα strips, τα ξέρουμε τα προβλήματα του CBCT όταν έχουμε high density, είναι partial beam hardening, είναι τα γνωστά προβλήματα που δεν λύνονται εύκολα, αλλά κοιτάμε την εικόνα στο HyperSight, έχουμε το ίδιο ποσοτικά και ποιοτικά πολύ πιο χαμηλό πρόβλημα σε μικρές air cavity στο έντερο. Παλιό, καινούριο. Εδώ μία ποσοτική ανάλυση κατά μήκος αυτής της γραμμής. Το κάναμε και με non-rigid και με rigid registration. Έχει σημασία αυτό, ειδικά όταν έχουμε κόκαλα και soft tissue, για να προσέξουμε λίγο τις μεταφορές. Αυτό που βλέπουμε εδώ όμως, και χωρίς να πω τι είναι τι, έχουμε μία διαφοροποίηση σε αυτή την περιοχή. Είμαστε εδώ, ανάμεσα στα δύο οστά, και έχουμε μία διαφοροποίηση της κατηγορίας 200 πριν 300 χαούς. Εγώ έμαθα φυσική ιατρική ότι, παιδιά, ό,τι είναι πάνω από 50 έχει δοσημετρικό effect. Υπάρχουν συνάδελφοι που λένε πάνω από 20 ή πάνω από 25. Αν πιστεύουμε το specification της variant ότι είναι πάνω από 50, θέλει adjustment. Εδώ μιλάμε για διαφοροποίηση 200 με 300 Hounsfield units. Προστάτης, το ίδιο, και εδώ μια μικρή ανάλυση για να δούμε τι γίνεται σε ένα marker. Αυτός είναι surgical marker, δεν είναι gold marker, και έχει επομένως titanium, και βλέπουμε ότι έχουμε γύρω στην κατηγορία των 600 Hounsfield numbers διαφορά ανάμεσα σε ένα κλασικό CBCT, που δεν ήταν και το χειρότερο, αυτό που είχε το έθος πριν το HyperSight versus HyperSight. Ποσοτική ανάλυση. Υπάρχουν αρκετές δημοσιεύσεις που αποδεικνύουν ότι το HyperSight Imaging System ικανοποιεί τις διαγνωστικές απαιτήσεις για διαγνωστική απεικόνιση. Εμάς, σαν σχεδιασμό δόσης, μας ενδιαφέρει η πιστότητα του electron density όσον αφορά για βάση του υπολογισμού δόσης μας στην ακτινοθεραπεία. Αυτό το κάναμε επανειλημμένα, έχουμε παρατηρήσεις πάνω από ένα χρόνο, σχεδόν ένα χρόνο, από το Δεκέμβριο του 2023. Εδώ είναι σύγκριση με το Big Bore και εδώ είναι σύγκριση με το τελευταίο. Έχουμε ένα PET-CT scanner για την ακτινοθεραπεία μας. Εδώ βλέπουμε ότι έχουμε ένα extremely good correlation, 1. Έχουμε ένα 2% shift. Το hypersite έχει ένα systematic 2% higher Hounsfield όσον αφορά το biograph, το scanner, το 128 vision. Όσον αφορά το Big Bore, η διαφορά είναι 6, αλλά αυτό οφείλεται στο Big Bore. Το Big Bore είναι παλιό μηχάνημα που έχουμε, το αλλάζουμε τώρα, έχει ένα συστηματικό underestimation της κατηγορίας του 4 με 5%. Αν κοιτάξουμε επομένως αυτό και κοιτάξουμε από Lang μέχρι aluminium, και γιατί aluminium, για αυτούς που χρησιμοποιούν variant ξέρουν ότι ο άκουρος τουλάχιστον μέχρι τη version 16,x μπορεί να λάβει υπόψη σαν μεγαλύτερη density υλικού του αλουμίνιου. Με τη version 18 μπορούμε να βάλουμε titanium. Βλέπουμε ότι η απόκλιση είναι πραγματικά μηδαμινή. Δείχνω εδώ τη διαφορά, ακόμη και του reconstruction algorithm, ακόμη και αν έχει κάποιος hypersite, δεν σημαίνει ότι αν δεν επιλέξει το σωστό αργόριθμο, ότι θα έχει την ίδια ποιότητα ανακατασκευής. Χρησιμοποιούμε εμείς τουλάχιστον standard, το scatter correction με τον άκουρος, και βλέπουμε εδώ την αντιστροφή σε χαμηλά density material. Έχει το κλασικό CBCT μεγαλύτερα Hounsfield. Όταν ανεβαίνουμε πάνω από ένα 0,5, βλέπουμε ότι αντιστρέφεται και αντιστρέφεται σημαντικά. Το ICBCT κάνει significant underestimation τα Hounsfield numbers. Δηλαδή, ακόμα και με hypersite πρέπει να κάνει κανείς σωστή reconstruction με scatter correction, σε αυτή την περίπτωση άκουρος, για να έχει αυτή την καλή ποιότητα ανακατασκευής. Ένα παιδί από την ομάδα μου, ο Σίγκι Κουν, κάνει ένα κομμάτι του διδακτορικού του, είναι αυτό, πήρε 32 ασθενείς που μπήκαν από head and neck και pelvic, 16 head and neck, 16 pelvic, 8 με ICBCT, 8 με hypersite, και σύγκρινε την κατανομή δόσης υπολογισμένη και συγκριμένη με το CT, και ξεχνάμε τα γκρίζα, γιατί αυτά είναι με rigid registration, και όπως είπαμε, ειδικά στην pelvic region και στο head and neck έχουμε αλλοιώσεις, οπότε πρέπει να προσέξουμε όταν κάνουμε συγκρίσεις. Άρα πιστεύουμε μόνο τον non-rigid registration. Στο 1 μιλιμέτρο, 1% είμαστε πάνω από 90% fitness σε αυτό το gamma index. Πολύ καλά αποτελέσματα. Δηλαδή, το δώσαμε στην κλινική μας ελεύθερο για υπολογισμό δόσης απευθείας στο hypersite CBCT. Ερωτήματα που μένουν είναι, έχουμε ικανό contrast σε soft tissue, pelvic region, head and neck, ώστε να πούμε ότι δεν χρειαζόμαστε μαγνήτη γενικά. Εγώ ξεκινάω από την κεφαλή, αυτά είναι εντελώς τυχαία scans που πήρα από το πρόγραμμα. Εδώ προφανώς και βλέπουμε ότι υπάρχει MAR correction, είναι με metal artifact correction, αλλά δεν νομίζω ότι είναι εύκολο να διαφοροποιήσει κανείς αυτές τις εικόνες από αξονικό, από τις εικόνες που ξέρουμε από το σχεδιασμό δόσης. Συνεχίζω με πνεύμονα, θώρακα, και νομίζω ότι όλοι μας θα μπορούσαν να σχεδιάσουν ισοφάγο σε αυτή την εικόνα, και αυτό δεν έγινε με την breath holding. Θα μπορούσε να πει κανείς, κύριε Μπάλτα, είχατε τύχη, ο ασθενής δεν ανάπνευσε. Συμφωνώ, αλλά σε 6 δευτερόλεπτα νομίζω ότι η πλειοψηφία των ασθενών μας μπορούν να κρατήσουν αναπνοή. Τέτοιες εικόνες είναι δυνατές. Είναι πραγματικότητα, τουλάχιστον είναι οι εικόνες που βλέπουμε εμείς. Αν πάμε στην περιοχή λεκάνης, αυτές είναι οι εικόνες που βλέπουμε καθημερινά όσον αφορά rectum, όσον αφορά bladder και prostate. Θεωρώ, δείχνω εξεπίτηδες τέτοιων ασθενή, γιατί ξέρουμε σε τέτοια volumes έχουμε ακόμα προβλήματα και στα κλασικά CT που χρησιμοποιούμε για σχεδιασμό δόσης. Αυτές είναι οι εικόνες που παίρνει κανείς καθημερινά στο hypersite. Και έρχομαι στο τρίτο κομμάτι της κουβέντας, που είναι intrafraction motion. Η ερώτηση είναι, τι εννοούμε όταν λέμε intrafraction. Το θέμα αυτό το προσέγγισαν συνάδελφοι από την Αυστραλία, είναι το δεύτερο τους paper, ήταν η πρώτη ομάδα που δημοσίευσε για προστάτη adaptive σε CBCT έτος, πριν από 2 χρόνια, έκαναν το 2024 ένα update και έκαναν κάτι πολύ ενδιαφέρον, το κάναμε και εμείς χωρίς να το δημοσιεύσουμε, μας πρόλαβαν. Τι έκαναν? Στο workflow του έθος, setup του ασθενή, CBCT για το adaptive πλάνο, η adaptive διαδικασία, θα δούμε χρόνους μετά. Μετά μπορείς να κάνεις ή όχι verification CBCT. Και μετά έχεις το delivery. Αυτοί πήραν το verification CBCT, έκαναν extraction, export στο Eclipse, ξαναέκαναν contouring και σύγκριναν την κατανομή δόσης σε αυτή τη φάση μετρώντας τους χρόνους. Και μένει μόνο η απάντηση να δούμε τι συμβαίνει intra-beam on, intra-irradiation motion. Αυτό είναι το intrafraction, για αυτό το κομμάτι εδώ θα δούμε τι γίνεται, για αυτό το κομμάτι εδώ θα δούμε πόσο είναι και θα δούμε τι μπορούμε να κάνουμε γι' αυτό. Αυτό είναι η ανάλυση. Δεν θα μείνω στα γκρίζα, θα μείνω στο πορτοκαλί και στο κίτρινο. Αυτή είναι η διαδικασία που γίνεται 3D adjustment της ανατομίας, IGRT, μετά από το adaptive. Και αυτό που βλέπουμε εδώ είναι πόσο τις 100 των περιπτώσεων το 95% του CTV είναι μέσα στο PTV. Και βλέπουμε ότι για margin 4 mm στον προστάτη έχουμε 100% σχεδόν των fractions είναι 95% του CTV καλυμμένο από το PTV μας και για τα seminal vesicles είναι 90%. Αν αυξήσουμε το requirement, εδώ για 98% του CTV μας να καλύπτεται από το PTV, βλέπουμε ότι για 4 και 5 mm πετυχαίνουμε 90 περίπου της 100 και 85. Δεν ξέρω πώς σχεδιάζετε στις κλινικές σας εσύ κλασικά IGRT prostate. Εμείς χρησιμοποιούσαμε μέχρι τώρα 6 mm με 8 στον προστάτη και 10 για τα seminal vesicles. Η ομάδα αυτή με αυτά τα δεδομένα κατέβασε τα margin στα μισά. Θα το δείξω αυτό, θα δούμε προηγούμενα μερικά άλλα νούμερα. Εάν δεν κάνεις αυτή τη διόρθωση, έχεις ένα 3D center of gravity στα contour σου του PTV στα 3 mm εδώ, σε seminal vesicles, στα 4 mm στα seminal vesicles, 3 στο προστάτη και σχεδόν το μισό όταν κάνεις τη διόρθωση. Εάν το δει κανείς στις 3 διαστάσεις, το βλέπει εδώ, πρέπει να προσέξει κανείς μόνο τα ranges. Οι μέσεις τιμές είναι μικρές, αλλά έχουμε μεγάλο range. Έτσι. Η απόφαση της ομάδας ήταν, μείωσε τα margins στο μισό. Δηλαδή στα 4 mm στο προστάτη και στα 5 mm στο seminal vesicles. Νομίζω είναι από τα πιο χαμηλά margin. Υπάρχει literature για 3 mm, για 2 mm στο SBRT. Εδώ μιλάμε για nomofractionated prostate, 20 to 25 fractions. Ήταν όχι μόνο σημαντικό επίτευγμα, αλλά μας δίνει μια βάση πληροφορίας για να δούμε τι μας περιμένει στο intra-beam on phase. Επαναλαμβάνω, το intrafraction είναι όλη η περίοδος μεταξύ κάνω το CBCT μου για να βρω την ανατομία και έχω τελειώσει με την ακτινοβόληση. Το μόνο κομμάτι που δεν ξέρουμε είναι το κομμάτι τώρα τι συμβαίνει στη φάση που το beam μου είναι on. Κοιτάμε τους χρόνους που δημοσίευσε η ομάδα αυτή. Η διαδικασία του adaptive planning μεταξύ CBCT μέχρι να κάνει το verification CBCT ήταν 17 λεπτά, 20 λεπτά περίπου. Είναι νούμερα που ξέρουμε. Αν σκεφτούμε ότι ένα κανονικό session είναι γύρω στα 10 λεπτά, σε εμάς οι ακτινοβολήσεις στο έθος έχουν slots ανά ασθενή 10 λεπτό. Σημαίνει ότι έχουμε μια επέκταση των 17 λεπτών. Ο χρόνος beam on είναι 3 λεπτά και σε εμάς το ίδιο, συνήθως είναι 2 arcs. Και ο χρόνος, επειδή το μηχάνημα περιστρέφεται 5 φορές το λεπτό, έχει 800 monitor units per λεπτό, είναι περίπου ο ίδιος. Είναι 3 λεπτά που έχουμε beam on, που συνήθως ανεξάρτητα από το τι τεχνική έχουμε, αν μιλάμε για VMAT. Εάν κοιτάξουμε το χρόνο σε εμάς, έχουμε μεγαλύτερο 24 λεπτά και θα εξηγήσω γιατί. Είμαστε πανεπιστημιακό νοσοκομείο, εκπαιδεύουμε προσωπικό. Η πρώτη ανάλυση είμαστε ακριβώς στους ίδιους χρόνους. Τώρα έχουμε την τρίτη γενιά γιατρών που εκπαιδεύονται στα contouring. Έτσι ο χρόνος αυτός αλλάζει ανάλογα με τη χρονική στιγμή που αναλύουμε. Παίρνουμε χρονικές στιγμές από το database του έθος. Αυτό δείχνει αν σε αυτή τη φάση είχαμε καινούριους γιατρούς στο έθος, ναι ή όχι. Το recontouring σε εμάς είναι 5 λεπτά κατά μέσον όρο και δεν είναι μόνο το recontouring, είναι το evaluation του πλάνου, η απόφαση αν θα πάρουμε το adaptive πλάνο ή όχι, πόσο χρειάζεται ο κάθε γιατρός για να πάρει μαζί με το φυσικό αυτή την απόφαση. Ο χρόνος, ο συνολικός, 27 λεπτά. Δεν θα μπω σε λεπτομέρειες, υπάρχει αρκετή λιτερατούρ για την εμπειρία αυτή που αποδεικνύει οι χρόνοι είναι περίπου οι ίδιοι. Όλοι πετυχαίνουν να βελτιώσουν το coverage του PTV, να κάνουν guarantee ότι το D90, το V90, V95, D90, D95 ικανοποιείται σύμφωνα με το σχεδιασμό. Όλοι όσοι είχαν βάλει στόχο να μειώσουν τα margins το κατάφεραν. Επαναλαμβάνω, δεν θα μπω σε λεπτομέρειες, οι χρόνοι υπάρχουν εδώ. Υπάρχουν εξωτικοί με 36 λεπτά στο liver, υπάρχουν χρόνοι στο προστάτη επίσης, εξωτικοί με 11 λεπτά. Αυτά είναι reported στη literature. Έρχομαι στο τελευταίο κομμάτι για να δούμε και ένα απευθείας ίσως σύγκριση με αυτά που είπε ο συνάδελφος Στάθης προηγούμενα. Υπήρξε ένα paper του 2023, ήρθε από το Tennessee και έκανε ακριβώς την ίδια ανάλυση με εμάς. Εδώ είναι το learning effect. Βλέπουμε πόσο σκάτεροι είναι οι χρόνοι που θέλουν ανασθενή, anasession. Βλέπουμε τη σύγκληση με κάποιο range, αλλά με μια μέση τιμή γύρω στα 16 λεπτά. Οι χρόνοι αυτοί επιβεβαιώνονται και τα προηγούμενα. Άρα χρειαζόμαστε για μια adaptive session στο CBCT-based ethos περίπου 17 λεπτά πιο πολύ χρόνο. Η ερώτηση είναι τι κάνουμε με αυτή την πληροφορία. Αν πάμε λοιπόν στο administration ή αν πάμε στα insurance, στις ασφαλιστικές, θα μας πούνε το εξής. Εμείς θα τους πούμε, παιδιά, κατά μέσον όρο πετύχαμε 16% καλύτερο coverage. Πήρα αυτό το νούμερο γιατί είναι πιο απλό. Και χρειαζόμαστε 16 λεπτά πιο πολύ χρόνο. Σε αυτά τα 16 λεπτά είναι therapist, είναι physicist, είναι physician. Αν το έχουν κάνει στην publication αυτή, μας βγαίνουν... Έχω δύο διαφάνειες. Σε decision-making politicians. Δεν είναι μόνο το προσωπικό που επιπλέον κρατάμε σε αυτή τη θέση. Σε εμάς, στην περίπτωση του Freiburg, σε αυτό το χρόνο θα είχαμε ακτινοβολήσει περίπου 2 ασθενείς. Δηλαδή, θα έπρεπε σε αυτόν τον υπολογισμό να βάλω τι χάνω από τη μία ακτινοβόληση 2 ασθενών σε 2 σλότς. Συν τα επιπλέον έξοδα του γιατρού. Και στη Γερμανία ερχόμαστε σε ένα νούμερο που είναι μεταξύ 800 με 1.000 ευρώ. Το λέω αυτό γιατί υπάρχουν πάντα οι τάσεις να πείσουμε ότι το χρειαζόμαστε και μερικές φορές οι τάσεις αυτές είναι αυτοκαταστροφικές. Έτσι. Βρήκα πολύ ενδιαφέρον και έρχομαι σε ένα παλιό που είχα πει κάποτε στην Έστρο και μου απαγόρεψαν να το επαναλάβω, ότι είναι η εποχή να μιλάμε για economically effective doses, ίσως σε συνδυασμό με biological effective doses. Αλλιώς δεν πρόκειται σε χώρες όπως η Γερμανία και η Ελλάδα, από ό,τι ξέρω, να πετύχουμε για advanced τεχνολογίες τέτοιες πληρωμές που να οδηγήσουν τα νοσοκομεία να είναι σε θέση να τις αγοράσουν και να τις χρηματοδοτούν στη λειτουργία τους. Και επαναλαμβάνω, αυτό δεν είναι θέμα μόνο στην Ελλάδα, είναι ένα βασικό θέμα που έχουμε στη Γερμανία. Έτσι. Και σε συνδυασμό με SBRT 4 με 10 fractions, είναι η οικονομική καταστροφή του μοντέλου ακτινοθεραπείας που λειτουργεί τουλάχιστον στη χώρα από την οποία έρχομαι σαν επαγγελματίας. Λοιπόν, conclusions. Νομίζω ότι ποσοτικά, ποιοτικά μπορούμε να πιστούμε, για αυτά είναι εύκολα να τα δει κανείς, είναι αναπαραγάγημα. Πιστεύω ότι όσον αφορά το contrast δεν τα έχουμε δει όλα, όσον αφορά από τις δυνατότητες που έχει το καινούριο αυτό σύστημα. Υπάρχουν ήδη επιπλέον εξελίξεις όσον αφορά τους αλγόριθμους ανακατασκευής εικόνας. Πιστεύω για το interfraction motion θα πρέπει να ξεκαθαρίσουμε γιατί μιλάμε. Το σίγουρο είναι ότι μπορούμε να μειώσουμε πολύ σημαντικά τα margins μας, το να το μειώσουμε κατά 50% είναι πολύ σημαντικό ποσοστό και σε αυτό το θέμα πιστεύω ότι συνεχίζουμε να περιμένουμε εξελίξεις στα X-rays based συστήματα. Και θα ανατελειώσω ότι όπως όλοι μας βασιζόμαστε σε μια ομάδα, αυτή είναι η ομάδα της φυσικής μας, στο Freiburg, στο τμήμα μου, με την Χαρούλα, Ελληνίδα, κάνει PhD, Μάρβιν, Ηλιάνα, Σίγκη, Μούστακ, Τόμας, Μπένετικ, Τόμας, όλα αυτά τα παιδιά δουλέψαν για να στήσουν τα δύο έθος. Κάθε έθος μας πήρε μία εβδομάδα για συνολικό commissioning και αξίζει ένα μεγάλο ευχαριστώ σε αυτούς και σε εσάς που είχατε την υπομονή και την αγάπη να με ακούσετε. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Ευχαριστούμε, Δήμο. Όπως πάντα συναρπαστική η παρουσίαση για το core BFT και για το adaptive. Έχουμε χρόνο για μια ερώτηση, αν χρειάζεται κάτι. Αλλιώς τον κύριο Μπαλτά θα το δείτε και έξω και στο διάλειμμα.
Ενώ υπάρχουν πολλές ερωτήσεις στο κλινικό, μια ερώτηση φυσικής. Παρατήρησα ότι συγκρίνατε τα 100 kV το CBCT με τα 80 kV στο PET-CT και τα 90 kV στο τέτοιο. Γιατί αλλάξατε...
Σας παραπλάνει.
Τη μισή αλήθεια.
Ναι, όχι. Αν προσέξαμε και ήταν δύσκολο να το δει κανείς, εξαιρέσαμε στο έθος κάτω από 100, στο Philips κάτω από 80 και στο Biograph κάτω από 90. Γιατί εκεί η σύγκριση είναι εντελώς καταστροφική. Και πήραμε ή το μέσον όρο όλων των kilovoltage πάνω από αυτά τα όρια, γιατί όπως ξέρουμε, δεν ξέρω ποιες είναι οι δυνατότητες σε άλλα πλάνα σύστημα, αλλά στο Eclipse δεν μπορώ να πω έχω ένα σκάνερ και έκανα acquisition με 120 ή με 140, άρα παίρνουμε μέσες τιμές όλων αυτών των acquisitions. Γι' αυτό πήραμε τη μέση τιμή. Και βάλαμε λίγο focus στο 125-120, επειδή είναι η πιο συνήθις kilovoltage που παίρνουμε στο έθος.
Μιλάω για το διάγραμμα που τα είχατε σε σύγκριση στον ψ-άξονα το ένα και στο άλλο, γιατί είχατε όλα τα Housefield units και όλες τις πυκνότητες. Γι' αυτό μου έκανε εντύπωση από τις φυσικής και μόνο.
Ήταν λίγο κρυφή η πληροφορία, αλλά επειδή το είπες, Ευάγγελε, θα στο βάλω πολύ γρήγορα. Συγγνώμη, ο καφές δεν θα κρυώσει.
Είμαστε φυσικοί, οπότε...
Ναι. Εδώ είπες, έτσι.
Όχι, πριν.
Ναι.
Πίσω.
Μπράβο. Εδώ λέει...
Κάτω είναι 80%.
All
και...
without 90. All without 100. Εντάξει. Είναι λίγο παραπλανητικό. Θα έπρεπε να γράψω μεγαλύτερο το 80, μεγαλύτερο το 100. Έτσι. Τα εξαιρέσαμε αυτά γιατί έχουμε εκεί όλα τα προβλήματα της reconstruction εμφανίζονται στα χαμηλά KV. Έχουμε πολύ μεγάλο effect στο beam hardening. Όλα αυτά που ξέρουμε. Και επειδή δεν το χρησιμοποιούμε, πήραμε τις μέσες τιμές. Έτσι. Και εγώ ευχαριστώ.
Ευχαριστούμε όλους για τη συμμετοχή σας.